everybody. Welcome to the Peru Channel Podcast. It's April 20th, 2025, and I'm your host, Philip. This week, I'm going to talk about some things that have been rattling around in my head for a long time. To be honest, this topic is one that's been on my mind a lot as long as I've been coming to Peru for 20 years, because while there's no place like Peru to visit as a tourist, the dark side of tourism here is very real. From your initial research to making plans to actually traveling around the country, there are just so many possible issues to be aware of that most people wouldn't expect. One of the things that really drives me crazy, and I talk about this frequently, is watching YouTube videos or reading blogs by people telling you, quote, all you need to know about Peru or Cusco or Machu Picchu or just about anywhere here where they have almost no experience. Video titles like The Complete Guide to Machu Picchu by someone who spent a few hours there listening to misinformation by a guide who has only a poor, at best, high school education are extremely frustrating because they're watched by thousands and thousands of people who think they're actually correct. A lot of creators mean well, but it's really clear to me that many, if not most, of the creators on YouTube have one thing in mind, and that's filling up a video with whatever they can with the sole intention of entertaining you, keeping you watching, and making money. Accuracy of information is really not a concern. I know I shouldn't let it bother me because there's nothing I can do about people trying to make money off of other people who might be inclined to believe whatever they make up, but it does. Honesty and integrity have always been one of the core values of my life because just about everything else that is good springs from those values. While no one is perfect, and certainly I'm far from it, to intentionally be dishonest, especially in the pursuit of money, is something I simply can't understand. That's the reason I started this podcast. It's the reason why I produce videos on YouTube as well as write on my blog. Peru is one of the most amazing places in the world with some of the most amazing people. There simply is no reason to not be as honest as one can be because the reality of the country is more than enough to blow away all but the most jaded traveler. Sadly, this happens in the tourism industry, especially around Cusco, constantly. It apparently doesn't take much of an education to be a guide or to run an agency. Many guides and agencies don't even bother operating with a license and simply disappear when there's a problem. I can't tell you how many times someone has asked me to help them when they've mistakenly sent money to pay for a tour. But when they arrive, or if there's a problem, the promised refund is never delivered, and often the person or agency has just disappeared. There have been two very public instances of apparent massive fraud and theft of Peruvian groups in the past few months. In the first, a large group of students and their parents had flown to Cusco for what here is known as promociones, the time when students move up at the end of the school year. Once they arrived, it turned out the person who had made all the arrangements involving a huge amount of money for travel, lodging, and all the activities that had been promised just disappeared. It was then discovered that very little of their money had actually been spent, leaving the families and students abandoned in Cusco, unsure of how they would even be able to return home, much less enjoy everything that they had paid for. The hotel where they were staying at had no resort but to ask them to leave after several days of unpaid stay involving many rooms. Another group of parents paid a significant amount of money to a person who was to make arrangements for another end-of-school trip, but the person took all the money and disappeared. For a while, fake train tickets to Machu Picchu were being sold, and several people were actually taken into custody by the police for trying to use fraudulent tickets until it became clear that they had thought they were buying legitimate tickets. Another scam that I've seen several times recently is to offer someone help when they need a last-minute plane ticket. Money is paid and real tickets are bought, but when the buyer gets to the airport, they discover that the tickets are for the absolute minimum, which includes no carry-on or checked luggage, and that leaves the person obligated to pay the airline significant amounts of extra money to travel with their stuff at the last minute. It's so sad, but this kind of stuff is very common, and very little, if anything, ever happens to the scammer. It's nearly certain that nothing will happen if the scam involves tourists. Regulation here is almost non-existent. Agencies and guides come and go all the time. Many are not licensed at all, meaning There's no way to trace them when there's a problem. If something happens, no tourist here for a few days knows what to do, or almost none. There is a process, but like everything else that happens in Peru with regard to the law, it's slow, and no one is going to be willing to go through that even for a significant amount of money. Trying to deal with it when you've returned to your home country is virtually impossible. I remember several years ago when I bought a tour from a small agency which may not have even been licensed. The receipt specifically had English guide written on it, but the guide in fact spoke no English. Well, he was really nice, and frankly, I didn't need a guide for the tour anyway, because often it's easier and cheaper for me to just go on a tour somewhere to let someone else handle the transportation and the logistics. I decided that I wasn't going to let them get away with it. When I realized what had happened, I thanked the guide, who was, as I said, very nice, and I caught a ride back to Cusco, where I confronted the agency owner and the person who sold me the tour. At first, they refused to refund my money. The owner even tried to put the receipt in his pocket, saying he would take care of it later. Of course, I knew he would destroy it once I was gone, and as far as he was concerned, that would be the end of it. Finally, I'd had enough of his obvious unwillingness to return my money, so I walked over to a traffic police officer and asked for help. Of course, this lady had no jurisdiction and couldn't do anything. She was busy directing traffic. But the agency owner saw it and realized I was serious about getting my money back. He immediately rushed up to me and said, "Let's go get your money." He was really angry, but he gave me all my money back. How many tourists bother to do anything at all? I've never heard of a single one, even though it can be a fairly intimidating way to get help, especially if you approach the tourist police. One tout selling me tours told me he spent a couple of days in jail because of a complaint made by two tourists who claimed he scammed them. This particular guy is not very trustworthy, and I've known him for many years, so it may have been an exaggeration, but I have confidence that the tourism police will help as much as they can, and they can make life difficult for guides and agencies working on the street, especially if it's discovered that they're operating illegally. The problem is most people don't bother going to the police. Illegal and unlicensed guides and agents also operate all over social media. In most Facebook groups, they lie in wait under the surface just like piranhas. They wait for someone to ask a question and then they pounce. Private messages are the common way for them to contact people on social media with a question. This allows them to say whatever they want without any repercussions from others who would read their responses and point out misinformation, and sometimes even provide deliberate disinformation and lies. I found it interesting that public responses from agencies and guides are actually quite minimal in most Facebook groups. The ones that do respond are almost always providing accurate information. Of course, there's always the spammers who reply to every query, no matter what, with a cut and paste link to their agency website, or they give a phone number without even trying to answer the original question. Stay away from those as much as possible. Perhaps the most frightening dark side of tourism in Peru is that sometimes, more times than ever gets mentioned, people just simply disappear. I saw a news report around the first of the year that mentioned more than 10 cases of missing tourists in the Sacred Valley of Cusco just in the past year. It also mentioned the associations with, quote, illegal shamanic centers that don't pay taxes and don't have operating licenses. It describes how these entities enticed hundreds of tourists with a promise of life-changing activities that are completely unregulated. This has been a problem in Cusco for many years and in other places as well, like Iquitos, where drug tourism through legal, quote, healing medicines like ayahuasca are practiced by people who have zero qualifications to dispense extreme hallucinogens. This is one of the biggest tourism industries in Peru, and it's virtually unregulated. Ask any country's embassy or consulate in Peru, and they'll tell you about the sexual assaults, robberies, or worse that have happened in these cases. They will also tell you that's just the ones that are reported. While places like Iquitos are known for this, it's also common in the Cusco region too. Fake shamans and fake experts are a serious problem here as they put people's lives in danger by having no medical or scientific qualifications. It's really sad that it's very common for people to simply just disappear. This has been a well-known fact that happens a lot more than the annual one or two disappearances that are publicized. It's so easy for some uneducated guy who grew up a dirt poor potato farmer to realize that he can convince gullible tourists with a lot of money that he's from a long family tradition of healing shamans. Even better, if he has the financial support of a foreigner who puts up the money for a lodge or retreat, also with the sole intention of legally supplying drugs to both desperate people as well as those who are simply looking for a place to take extremely powerful hallucinogens and expand their upper-class drug experience while traveling on daddy's money. Over nearly 2 decades, I've met tons of people on both sides of this business. Oddly, no one seems to mention the truth that for thousands of years of hallucinogenic shamanism here, that the only one who takes the drugs are the shamans who use their visions to advise their communities. It wouldn't be a thought for anyone else to drink ayahuasca. That's the job of the shaman. But in the modern industry, people pay thousands of dollars for a week at a retreat where there is almost no medical supervision except, again, by Juan the potato farmer. Even worse is when the shaman is actually a dropout from Iowa who left his job at McDonald's to come to Peru a few years ago, again on daddy's money, to try something different and discovered he could make a lot of money selling these drugs to tourists. Ask any local in the Iquitos area not affiliated with tourism if they've ever experienced ayahuasca, and they'll look at you as if you're crazy. Sadly, drug tourism almost universally attracts wealthy people from the U.S. and Europe and is heavily financed by foreigners in Peru. In other countries, they'd be considered drug dealers and criminals. Here they call themselves shamans and healing facilitators, even though it's the same thing as drug dealing, except with a lot more sophistication. When foreigners frequently disappear in Peru, if you even hear anything about it at all, it almost always comes out that they were associated in some way with some kind of healing retreat or center. It's always been a basic assumption in Iquitos that when someone disappears, something bad happened in the jungle and their body was quietly buried deep in the rainforest where it would never be found. It's a lot easier to deal with it that way, even if it was a completely innocent accident, rather than involve the police and the media, which would only create negative publicity for their business. Perhaps even a little money handed to the right people could help keep things quiet if word ever got out that something might have happened. If you want to come to Peru and take powerful drugs where it's legal, that's your business. But if you value your life, think twice. Just post on social media that you're a foreigner who's looking to come to Peru to experience healing medicines and watch how fast you're overwhelmed with offers. Then try asking for proof of someone's medical or scientific credentials and see how long the silence lasts as they disappear like cockroaches when someone turns on the lights. Okay, enough of that. It just makes my blood pressure go up every time I think of people taking advantage of Peru and Peruvians with the sole intention of selfishly making money. Everyone who knows me knows how little regard I have for most of the guides in the Cusco area, especially at Machu Picchu. There are apparently few, if any, real requirements other than having a basic Wikipedia-level knowledge and being able to tell your clients what they want to hear. After around 80 trips to Machu Picchu and countless other times wandering around the popular tourist sites in the Cusco area, I'm always amazed at how little the guides know and how much misinformation is spread. I remember during the COVID pandemic when guides were telling all kinds of ridiculous stories about the site. I finally talked with some of them and was told that while they sat around waiting for someone to show up, because there were very few tourists coming in the early days when Machu Picchu reopened, they realized that they needed some extreme stories to tell so they could entertain and They would entertain and subsequently receive bigger tips. In short, they came up with deliberate lies to make more money when there was a serious shortage of visitors. I listened to guys telling people things like Machu Picchu was an Inca university or it was an Inca Airbnb. Yeah, the truth is, I actually heard that one time. And don't get me started about those who claim that all the major Inca sites were actually created by some ancient megalithic civilization that, strangely, only they know about and for which they have zero evidence. Those, of course, are always men who have learned the value of the scam in Peru and make an awful lot of money doing it. That was so sad because had they taken the time to actually educate themselves with the realities of Machu Picchu and other places in Peru, they would have far more interesting information to share. Another thing about many Machu Picchu guides that you should be aware of is that they time their tours so as to be available when the next group of tourists will arrive. A guide who knows what he is doing, and it's seemingly always male guides who do this scam, can guide up to 3 groups a day, which is a significant amount of money. I've seen them skip some of the best parts of the site just so they can get through faster. And of course, when I see them doing this, I check my watch, and sure enough, it's obvious that they're in a hurry to get out and be ready for the next big group of tourists that arrive at a certain time, usually around somewhere between 11:30 and 12:30 when the midday group comes. What's good about tourism in Peru? Fortunately, a lot more than the bad things. For one thing, there's a lifetime of amazing places to visit and people to know. Despite the abundance of poorly educated guides, there are some places where the guides are consistently outstanding. Even in Cusco, where the guides are notoriously untrained, there are some extremely knowledgeable guides who take their job seriously and provide an excellent experience for their clients. If you go on a rainforest tour in places like Iquitos or Puerto Maldonado or Manu, sorry, I don't know about Pucallpa, that's a place I've never been before, you're almost certain to be accompanied by a highly knowledgeable guide. The reason for that is most jungle guides grew up in the rainforest and know it like their backyard because, for much of their life, it really was their backyard. I've only had 2 bad guides in the rainforest. One came from Puno, and I'll be honest, I don't understand why anyone would think that living high in the Andes Plateau would make them qualified to lead groups into the lower Amazon rainforest. Sadly, it showed clearly as he walked past everything of interest, leaving it to me to show the others in my group all the things that he missed. He was a nice, honest person, but he just didn't know much about the rainforest. And if you're wondering why I spend so much time with jungle guides, it's because some of the places like Lago Sandoval and the Tambopato Reserve near near Puerto Maldonado actually require guides. If you don't have a guide, you can't get past the control. I spent so much time in the rainforest all over northern and southern Peru that it even surprises me how well I know the rainforest, especially Tambopato, where I frequently leave the groups so I can spend a few hours of my own in the jungle. I've even had some guides split the group up if necessary, usually based on the difference in age and ability, and ask me to take one part of the group. It's not really supposed to happen, but since I know so many guides, several of them trust me enough to ask me to do this. And of course, I don't mind a bit. It's a highly specialized type of experience for which reading Wikipedia and watching a few YouTube videos is completely insufficient. Knowing where to find things like insects and tarantulas, and even being aware of where venomous snakes might be found is something that comes with experience. Knowing how to find bigger animals like monkeys and exotic birds, and even some of the rarely seen mammals is something I've been taught over the years by generous people who know the jungle far better than I will ever know it. I just wish guides in the Cusco area were like the jungle guides. A few days ago, I stood outside Cusco's cathedral listening to a really slick guy talking to his group about regional customs before leading them into the church. He literally was making things up. I asked him a question politely when he was finished about a different topic, and he just looked at me and turned away with a really nasty look on his face. He was extremely friendly to the group, but probably was the kind, and I see them quite a bit, who talk bad about them when they left because it was all an act for him. I overheard another guide last week lying to a large group at Sacsayhuaman who had probably paid him hundreds of soles. He was telling them how the first Spaniards there became lost for 3 days in the maze at Sacsayhuaman. I immediately started laughing behind his back, as that was easily the worst piece of garbage I'd ever heard a guide say. I'm sure he never bothered to show them the area where this supposed maze was located because they would have immediately seen that there was no such thing and that he was lying. But to them, it was a great story, and I'm sure they went home telling that to their family and friends. that really bothers me because I see people talking all the time about how great their guide was and ask, well, how do you know that your guide was really good? Well, he was really entertaining and seemed to know what he was talking about. The odds are that the guy was simply making up stuff. They know, they are professionals at being entertaining and giving you what you want to know. Most of them are extremely experienced at asking you questions to find out what you want to know. And they know if you seem to be the kind of person that wants to know about ancient megalithic civilizations, they've got stories for that. If you're the person that wants to hear about aliens who created Machu Picchu, they've got stories for that. Fortunately, Peruvians are generally friendly and kind people, but the tourism industry attracts some of the worst because they can legally make really good money with minimal education because all they have to do is put on the illusion that they are knowledgeable and experienced. All this stuff I've been talking about really angers the majority of people in the tourism business who are honest and who work hard and try to give you a really good experience in Peru. For instance, one of the Machu Picchu tour agencies that I always recommend to anyone is Alpaca Expeditions. The main reason I started recommending them is because I've ridden on the local train with some of their porters who come back, and this train is separate from the ones that the tourists are taking, and I've always found them to be respectful and considerate of other train passengers. If they act like that when they're not around their clients, it's a safe bet that they are genuinely professional when they are with them. I've watched many other porters from other countries who are complete monsters when they're away. They push old people out of the way to board the train, and they fight for space to put their bags. I've also met countless porters making their final way into Aguas Calientes loaded down with their clients' baggage while their clients are making their last climb up to Machu Picchu. Even though they're tired after 4 or 5 days of hard work, I can always tell from a distance by their shirts who's going to smile and be friendly with me as we pass along the trails and who's going to pass by without saying a word. I've tried to go with Alpaca Expeditions twice over the past 2 years to Machu Picchu on the Inca Trail, but wasn't able to because they simply didn't offer the specific options that I needed, which was very understandable since I don't need everything that a normal tourist requires. I was impressed that the office staff remembered me when I returned the second time over a year later to check again. They really tried to do what they could, but explained why it wasn't feasible for their programs to offer what I needed. Another agency I strongly recommend for Machu Picchu is Machu Picchu Reservations. I've known quite a few people who have gone with them, and they've all raved about the experience. One day I'll probably do the Salcantay trek with them since I don't have to share a tent with a stranger, and I'm a little too old to be doing that at this point in my life, and I don't have to ride the expensive train back to Cusco because I just don't need all the pampering that they offer for tourists. I just wanted to do the route with a guide the first time before doing it alone in the future. Okay, that's it for this episode. Everyone's getting ready for the high season, which is going to begin very soon, usually in mid to late May and early June, when schools and universities close out the year and people from the U.S. start the traditional vacation season there. The Inca Trail to Machu Picchu has reopened after being closed an extra month due to the extreme rainy season the region experienced this year, and it certainly looks as if the dry season is finally coming to a close, as there are far more dry days and sunny days in the Cusco region than we've seen in months. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and got something out of it. Please feel free to follow the link to the show notes where you can leave any comments or questions, and any comments you have on Apple or Spotify are also greatly appreciated. Again, thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you in Peru soon.